The Isle is an interesting game. You can go from completely okay to having access to food and water in a safe area to running for your life or starving to death in the span of about 15 minutes, or in some cases about 10 seconds. And it's because of this I've been motivated to make a video that might just help some people out there. Though calling it a video might be wrong. I plan to turn this into an entire series, a series that demonstrates what you should and shouldn't do as a particular creature or within particular settings and environments within the Isle. The reason I'm making this is to hopefully help newer players and maybe even older players survive within the Isle. It can be very difficult to survive within the Isle as both a creature you are not familiar with or within an area you are not familiar with. And hopefully this video will help with that. Now realize that most of the information from within these videos is going to be from my personal experience within the Isle. So if you or someone you know have other methods to survive within the Isle, that's okay. The methods within this video are meant to help people grasp the basics of how to survive within the Isle, and that I also know can be done alone. Now, with that out of the way, let's get to the first episode of The Isle Survival Guide. Episode 1: Water. Now, water within the Isle is not a complicated concept. I mean, here, this is a pool of water. You drink it, and you don't die. Pretty simple, kind of like how real life works. Now, with the advent of the recent patches, it's not hard to find water. I mean, you just have to click Q and boom, there's water. There, and there, wherever. But there is an aspect of water I do want to talk about, and that's more or less the atmosphere around water, and water sources in general. Similar to how real-life animals function, both predators and prey in the Isle, basically herbivores and carnivores, need water, meaning both are going to be drawn to water sources, meaning that inevitably conflict is going to ensue. Or if you're a smaller carnivore, you're probably going to come into contact with a larger one. Now, this is the aspect I want to talk about, and that's the safety around water, and how you can actually prevent from being killed around water sources. An example of this would be the old and new swamp. The old swamp, while at least somewhat wooded, was a lot more open than the current swamp. And larger predators and smaller predators alike can camouflage themselves much easier within this current body of water. So, my first tip of advice, to avoid this water source. It might seem like kind of a cop-out to say this, and sometimes you're going to be forced toward it, but consistently I haven't been able to survive very long at this water source, and I've tried on 6 different carnivores and 2 different herbivores. Now, this area does come with some high-risk, high-reward gameplay. What do I mean by that exactly? Well, there's a lot of corpses around this area from both creatures that have starved to death or been killed by other predators and not fully eaten out of fear of being killed. So there is this going for it, and I can say for sure that you do stay pretty well fed if you're around swamp. But my biggest issue comes into play is that this is high risk, high reward you don't necessarily need to take. The other water sources are just as good of options, and if anything have less risks and are much safer for a new starting carnivore or herbivore. But as a grown carnivore or herbivore, or at very least a more mature one, this isn't actually a bad area to be in. It has a lot of food, a lot of water, and a pretty decent amount of cover for both ambushes and hiding. But for a new starting player, or at very least a newer player to the game, or a new spawn, this isn't really that good of a location. You can be pretty easily seen and killed if you don't know what you're doing, and if you're not just a little too careful, you'll be killed pretty quick. Now, with that out of the way, let me talk about the more safe option when it comes to water, and that is this creek/river. I'm more inclined to call it a creek, but it's on this side of the map and in this area. Now, this creek is actually pretty unique in comparison to other bodies of water in the Isle. And that's because whenever you use scent, you can't see it through terrain. You have to be able to physically see it in order for it to glow. And the reason that this is important is because other creatures and carnivores won't flock to one particular area at once. The danger of water is that you are constantly being put in an area and situation where you are one, open to attack, and vulnerable due to you being in an animation. What I would suggest is going to this body of water because of how vast and long it is. The sheer distance that this body of water covers is something that you can use to your advantage, and the reason I say this is because it's going to be very rare for you to find another creature in the same area as you due to just how much water there is here. And unlike other bodies of water, there's quite a bit of cover around this area, meaning if there is another creature near you or around you, you can simply move downstream or upstream without being seen, meaning you still have access to water and you don't have to wait for this carnivore/creature to leave. And another advantage, which is one that I feel like most people should be thinking about, is because of how much water there is in this one area, you can patrol the banks looking for food as both a carnivore and a herbivore. There's bound to be something there at very least every once in a while. The sacrifice you make at going to other water sources is normally you have to leave out of fear of being hunted or killed. This particular water source gets rid of that fear, and with the amount of food that normally spawns on its banks, at least on occasion, for both carnivores and herbivores, you're bound to have at least enough food to survive until you make it to an adult and are able to move away from this small little bastion. It is because of these advantages that I've been using this spot pretty religiously on my Isles Survival series. It allows me to both survive and at least have some interesting gameplay to show. Now don't get me wrong, I have run into other carnivores along the banks, but the chances of running into them are much lower than in other areas. Now, to be fair, this is not the only water source in game that even has these same principles apply. There are other water sources that are so out of the way, or at very least so insignificant, that most people would never think of going there. Exploit these areas too. These areas can help your survival chances go up exponentially due to the fact that most people will never go near there, meaning your natural predator count drops to 0. Overall in the Isle, water is much more dangerous than it seems, and I would dare say that it's one of the most dangerous obstacles you'll face in the entire experience provided. So, I have 3 rules. Watch your back, pan the camera, and make sure you don't look down at the water source after you begin the animation. With these 3 steps, and also following some of the advice in this guide, I hope I've helped you survive a little bit longer in the Isle. And with that, I'd like to say thank you to the people who have supported me up to this point. Your support means a lot more than you think, guys, and I really want to thank you for it, and I hope this video is enough of thanks for that. Anyway, expect these to come out at least bi-weekly. Now that doesn't mean twice a week, that means every other week. Surprisingly, the editing that goes into these is much harder than it seems due to the fact that I'm somewhat of a perfectionist. And don't worry, the mic quality will eventually go up, I promise. Well, with that concludes the first episode of the Isle Survival Guide. I hope you enjoyed the video. As always, I will see you guys next time, and this has been the Jays of 77. Later, guys.